has
I'm
joined.
sorry, I'm late.
No worries. The message was received that you might be a little late. I was just checking my voicemail. I know Ted called me, I think yesterday, and I didn't listen to my voicemail, so perhaps he had left a message that he might not make it. So anyways, I guess we are now at quorum, so we can call this meeting to order. Just to acknowledge and welcome 3 members of the CBRD staff team. We have Tom Pon, the trio, James Warren, and Zoe Berkey online with us, and their specific interest is to support us with or listen into our discussion on the subdivision bylaw and give input where we might require. Welcome to everybody there. So let's just move into the agenda. And the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda and addition of any late items. Any thoughts from anybody with respect to the agenda?
Looks good.
Good.
There was one late item. I think, Gary, we're gonna put that onto the regular board meeting, right? The leak allowance discussion.
Yes.
Yes, right. So we'll leave that alone for now.
I just have
So-
one little thing. One
Sorry?
tiny thing. Could we just review the meetings we have scheduled? I have the board meeting on the 15th, is that right?
So do you want to have an agenda item just to review the?
Yeah, can we do that? Can
Yeah.
we review that? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that addition, anything else? Suzanne, you said you're okay. Eve, you say that's it for you. I have nothing new. So motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, adoption of minutes from the February 4th. Why are they not coming up when I look at them? Ah. I don't seem to have all of the supporting documents attached to that one. Apologize. I don't know. I can't get to the minutes.
Oh. Am I recording?
Yes, I'm recording it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just wondered, did I press something? And yeah, okay, good.
Apologies with this. I just, I had the file open that had everything attached, and all of a sudden I don't see that everything attached. Okay, now we have it here. Okay, so the minutes from the February 4th Committee of the Whole meeting, any additions, changes, deletions?
No.
No,
Okay, motion to approve the minutes as, or adopt the minutes as presented.
So moved.
second,
All in favor? Aye.
aye.
Okay, so let's move into the meat of the agenda, and starting with unfinished business and our, oh, I'm sorry. Where am I at? Yep, the unfinished business. Sorry, guys, I'm having trouble with my iPad. My fingers are not cooperating. So we're starting with bylaw number 264, the strategic priority of the subdivision written bylaw. I'm going to turn this over to Gary for an update on where we're at and to frame the discussion that we need to have here.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. And thanks to the CVRD staff who've graciously accepted our invitation to sit in and to primarily be here in a listening capacity. To hear the discussion from the trustees on issues related to the 2016 bylaw number 264 subdivision bylaw. Just briefly, in terms of how we got to this point, as you know, this was identified, the subdivision bylaw, as one of the critical strategic priorities that the board, all things considered, wished that we advance, move forward prior to conversion, if at all possible. And there's been some discussions in regards to the how to approach that. Basically, you'll recall that a couple of weeks ago, I did present a staff report on the subdivision bylaw, summarizing, consultations I'd had with the ministry, with the CVRD, with legal counsel, and with our engineering consultant on the status of the subdivision bylaw, the 2016 version that was never actually, at the end of the day, registered with the inspector of municipalities. So basically, it's never been registered, so it's not officially in effect at this point in time. And the various bylaws that were proposed to be repealed by that subdivision bylaw are still, to the best of my knowledge, and I've reviewed each of them, still active. They're still in force and effect. So in my report 2 weeks ago, I presented a series of recommendations which were adopted by the board. And those were basically that we not take steps at this time to revise and resubmit to the inspector of municipalities that 2016 subdivision bylaw. The ministry has given us, pretty solid indication that that's not their preferred option. That were we to do that, the inspector would, it's highly unlikely that the inspector would be able to do that prior to conversion. But more importantly, he would question why we would be submitting this so close to conversion. And that was one recommendation, that we not proceed at this time along that course of action, but rather that we communicate to the CVRD any concerns that UBID may have with respect to development servicing standards in general, or proposed or contemplated future developments for the Union Bay area. And of course, there's two big ones that you fairly recently reviewed in terms of referrals, Union Bay Estates and Upper Island Developments. And that we have a discussion with the CVRD in attendance, so that they could hear any concerns that the trustees have with respect to any exposures, gaps, vulnerabilities, concerns that they have moving forward with conversion in the absence of that subdivision bylaw. And, I accept that there's a lot of historical knowledge. I wasn't around at that time in 2016 when that subdivision bylaw was worked on and presented to the ministry. So really the purpose of today is to put this on a committee of the whole agenda, and for the trustees to have a conversation, a discussion about some concerns that they have, because the CVRD would be interested in hearing those. James and I have talked about, a couple of potential courses of action. Our understanding is that the CVRD has on their work plan a proposed work item to develop an all-encompassing subdivision bylaw for the CVRD, but that may be a longer-term process. But in the short term, if we identify any potential gaps that we're concerned about that are not necessarily covered off in the bylaws that the 2016 subdivision bylaw was supposed to repeal, they'd like to know about that at this time, because there's potentially maybe there's some a bylaw or some policies that could be put into effect by conversion. But that would be entirely dependent on, the discussion today in terms of what what concerns you may have. I have been through the principal bylaws that were supposed to be repealed by that 2016 subdivision bylaw. There's a street lighting bylaw, there's a water rates regulation bylaw, there's a water subdivision bylaw. Those, as I say, to the best of my knowledge, are still in effect because they were never repealed. There are certainly the 2016 subdivision bylaw was a lot more comprehensive and added a lot more details and undoubtedly updated the various specifications and works and services standards and stuff like that. But, you know, one thing I have noticed is that there is language still in those bylaws, which are still current, dealing with developers' obligations, what would be required of developers and subdividers when they submit applications, whose responsibility it is to pay for what, whether we're talking about servicing connections, excess requirements, latecomer agreements, that sort of stuff. But you know, I put a lot of paper as part of the package. I apologize for that, and I really don't propose to go through it in detail. But most if not all of it, you've seen. You've seen the 2016 subdivision bylaw. You'll recall that not that long ago, this board dealt with 2 referrals from Upper Island Developments and from Union Bay Estates. I did commission our engineering consultant to prepare some comments, which were presented to the board. The board, I won't say endorsed, but they accepted those comments and concerns. Those were relayed to the appropriate jurisdictions, MOT as well as CVRD. So really, I'm just going to turn it over, Mr. Chair, to the board. And again, CVRD is not here to really get into the weeds of our bylaws. You know, they nor I have done a real in the weeds examination of those existing bylaws, compared them to the subdivision bylaw, and identified any technical gaps and things like that. But as I say, there are in most respects, in my view, sufficient protections and mechanisms in place to cover off some of the concerns, maybe not all, but some of the concerns that I've heard from some of the trustees moving forward. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn it back to the board to have a discussion about the subdivision bylaw, you know, moving forward. And as I say, the CVRD is here primarily in a listening capacity. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And perhaps maybe I'll just add to that slightly and then really ask our trustees to say, what is it that's missing? What is it that causes concern? And I'd like to sort of reiterate this thought that we're not going to be able to enact a new bylaw in the time remaining as an improvement district, in that the ministry has basically said that they are, I don't know if opposed is too strong a word, but would recommend against taking such sort of new action or significant action this close to the end of our time as an improvement district, this close to conversion. And even if we were to do that, we would probably not be able to get it registered in time, and that they would not register it after conversion. So we're kind of in this place that says, even if we wanted to, we can't. But what is it that we're missing that we might want to pass to the CVRD to say, how could you cover us off? And I have reviewed the bylaws. Again, I haven't, as Gary said, I haven't done an in the weeds sort of matching of feature for feature, but I am convinced that the existing bylaws give us sufficient protection at a macro level, that the big points are covered. And that the main difference that I saw as I looked at it was the degree of detail within the 2016 proposed bylaw with respect to applications and specifications and standards and those sorts of things. So that was my sense of it. I also if anybody at the CVRD would say this differently, I would understand also that it is the CVRD's preference that we not add anything in this space and to leave it to them, or to request certain additional functionalities to our existing structure. So that's my take. Would love to now just hear from both Susanna and Eve, our other trustees, about what they see, what's missing, what might make this better for Union Bay. Who would like to go first?
Well, I'll jump in. First, I still take exception to the ministry position of being somewhat surprised at why we would be putting a subdivision bylaw forward. Well, it's because we have two extremely large development proposals at our wings. And, you know, that doesn't change whether we convert or not. They're still at our wings. And that's why the subdivisions were looked at to be revised in 2016, was we wanted to provide developers clear information about the expectations that each party holds when applying for a development, or whether they're big or large, to Union Bay. So, I mean, I'm by no means any kind of subdivision bylaw expert. So I feel what was recommended is in the document, bylaw 264. So who am I to say that 2 years worth of committee work, and actually that's back in 2016, it might even be out of date, so to speak. And maybe that kind of detail is not needed in a subdivision bylaw because of the changes. I don't know. However, I just want to say that we wanted to be protected, knowing we didn't know how much water capacity we had. We had major infrastructure that needs upgrading on a macro level, and that developers contribute to those costs. I was hoping that when we converted, we would automatically undertake CVRD's bylaw, subdivision bylaw, which I assumed would be better, more up to date, more comprehensive than little old Union Bay's. But it turns out no. Instead, we have to go with little old Union Bay's bylaws, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. So this has been a bit of a source of frustration. However, we just want to be protected. We want our treatment plant and all our infrastructure that the landowners have paid cold, hard cash without a penny of grants, or, you know, to be protected. That's really my concern as a trustee and my concern going forward. We've been burned. For example, I'll give one example, then I'll be quiet. We now have a water treatment plant, which is wonderful, on 4 acres, which was land given to us by one of these large developers. Well, it turns out, given the amount of, this is something CVRD needs to know, the amount of sludge, peat in our water, we really would have benefited from a larger piece of land and to deal with the sludge. That's a complicating issue specifically to Union Bay water. I don't think Comox Lake has the same issues. So that's turning out, that may have cost impacts on, you know, furthermore, we only have about 100 more homes in development before we need a second DAF unit. We need to know maybe the second DAF unit is better located in higher elevation. There's two complicating factors to Union Bay water, which is elevation and the turbidity. So I know that's got nothing to do
Order,
with
though, that's
subdivision
not really
bylaw.
related to the subdivision
I
bylaw,
know.
right?
I
Let's stay on the
apologize. It's
subdivision
what's-
bylaw.
I apologize. I will stop now.
Yeah.
That's what complicates the whole issue, though.
Okay.
Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Eve?
Well, I don't, to Gary's point where we can, try and put forth our concerns that our existing bylaws, what they're missing and, what we can sort of say we want to make sure is included. I don't feel qualified to do that because I would have to take the old bylaws and read them for the fine tooth comb and look through them and compare them with what we have here. And, that's a long process, which I'm quite willing to do, especially if there's a few of us that want to do it. But other than that, I can't just off the cuff say what the existing bylaws are missing that we want to make sure we include from the comprehensive consolidated bylaw that was worked on with a lot of care. I mean, this started when I was on the board. Well, we decided that we would get rid of all those piecemeal bylaws and get a comprehensive one that included everything. And you said it's the details. Well, the devil is in the details, Ian. So I don't believe that we're well protected by the existing bylaws. And I still also feel that we're being somehow railroaded and very, there's a block to this bylaw for no rational reason whatsoever, in my mind. And I don't think that the other two levels of government are really on our side here. And I think that if we can't, and then you said something, Ian, you said that even if that the CBRD could not enact this new bylaw even after conversion. I don't know why that is. Why can't they take this bylaw and update whatever needs to be updated and make it a bylaw for us?
For clarity, I didn't say that. What I said was that if we were to submit this bylaw to the province, that the province did not believe they would be able to put it through in time and therefore would not be able to enact it in time for conversion.
Yeah.
CBRD could enact a bylaw just like ours, but I didn't say that they couldn't do it. Just
That's
to
what
be
I
clear.
heard, but that's
Yeah.
good because
Yeah.
that's what I, as a trustee right now, that's what I want the CBRD to do, enact our bylaw after conversion. Maybe they can get the province to do it.
Well, sorry,
Go
may I
ahead.
speak? I don't think the ministry is necessarily blocking. I was on the board. This is where Eve drops off and I drop in. I was on the board when UBID was in conversations. It was Kevin Duville, who was actually our administrator at the time, in conversations with the provincial government on that bylaw. And that was the final recommendation, was that the bylaw be revised once again by our lawyer. Never did I have an indication that, and again, there seemed to be some jurisdictional issues that some of the content of that proposed bylaw were kind of beyond what an improvement district could do. Some of the recommendations were around that. So I don't necessarily feel, I can see, Eve, why you feel the way you do, but I think they just wanted to be sure that we didn't enact a bylaw that we couldn't actually legally enforce.
Well, then they
Okay.
could have said that.
They did when they sent it back to us and got us to get a legal opinion. Then the board of the day, of which I was a minority member, just dropped it. They never enacted the revisions, the recommendations. So really who dropped it was the board, our board of the time.
Yeah, and I think we know why, but we
Yeah.
don't say so.
And we can move on from there because, and I agree with Eve, if that was a motion, Eve, I second your motion that we request the CBRD enact bylaw 64 for Union Bay after conversion. I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay. Unless of course, we have staff, and I totally respect the technical staff of the CVRD. Unless you guys who have read it and looked at it, who know more, who can say it's not necessary, you know, like I am with Eve in that I am not a subdivision bylaw expert. I can also confirm though that this was developed by committee. It was developed by 2 years of community work. Like it wasn't something pulled together, cut and paste from various computer sites.
I would
That's
love,
kind of my,
sorry, I would love to hear from the CVRD
Yeah.
if they're willing to speak with regards to what difficulties we might cause them by making that request. And,
okay, yeah.
and my understanding is that the guidance that they've given through Gary is that they would prefer we don't enact this specific bylaw, but I don't want to put words in their mouth. And James, I don't want to put you on the spot either, but are you willing to sort of give us some background as to how you would like to see it go?
Sure, thanks. Thanks for inviting us, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. As Gary has mentioned, we've had fairly extensive conversations on the interests of UBID and where the CVRD currently sits with regards to subdivision standards and development opportunities. We appreciate the ministry's position as well, in that the inspector needs to register improvement district bylaws, and I just think at this stage it's a matter of timing. They've indicated the conversion is going forward. That's going to happen, and so that is where the ministry is focusing their intent. And registration of a new improvement district bylaw just is not an opportunity. So for UBID to press forward with a bylaw would be fruitless, I guess. Where the regional district comes in, the CVRD has a number of service areas for water distribution, water supply, and water distribution. And we have regulatory bylaws for those individual areas to guide connections, extensions, development opportunities. And the language in our bylaws enables the regional district to require property owners and developers to adhere to certain standards and contribute to certain improvements. We don't have a subdivision standards bylaw in a similar way to what you have. We do have an interest to develop that sort of language for the entirety of the regional district over time, but our focus is going to be more around hazardous areas, floodplain requirements, and those sorts of standards, because we feel that from a water subdivision development perspective, we already have language in our regulatory bylaws to that effect. And looking at your own bylaws online, you already have some language in your own bylaws. I think it's the water use and distribution bylaw number 226. And it includes reference in there to UBID requiring an applicant to pay for improvements and to follow guidelines. And so you have language already contained within your own bylaws. It's very similar to the language we have in our water regulations bylaws. So we're not sure where the gap exists necessarily, and that's why we wanted to try to understand where that gap might be. What we're asking, or what we're hoping to get from today's meeting is an understanding of where those gaps might be, and then is there a way for us to enhance our regulatory bylaws to address some of those gaps. And I don't think that means adopting in your entirety the subdivision bylaw that you drafted from a few years ago, but rather, are there some gaps that could be identified that we can enhance our bylaw with? When the conversion happens and Union Bay Water becomes a CVRD service, then your existing bylaws will become CVRD bylaws. the language that we feel covers you right now will become our language, if that makes sense. If there are gaps at that time, we can look to address those and amend the bylaws to close any sort of gaps. But so we're looking for where those gaps might be in your minds around protection, wanting to be protected. That's one thing I heard Trustee Kalger mention, was that desire to be protected. So
my sense is in the bigger things that Susanna mentioned, the protection of our water capacity and the requirement for developers to pay costs. The language that is in our existing bylaws is reasonably similar at that, sort of large clause level. Including, the need to extend, water services for the entire frontage of the property so that the next property can connect to it. That language remains pretty similar. What seemed to be missing to me were some of the schedules to the new bylaw that provided for the standards, the devil in the details that Eve spoke to. And just perhaps your staff could, maybe they have had a look to say, what exists in that way within the CBRD bylaws that are applicable that we could rely on? Or do we need to add certain parts of those schedules and that devil in the detail component into our existing bylaws in order for that to give us that additional componentry? That's my read on it, but Susanna and Eve, love to hear your read as well as to what's missing.
Again, I don't have the expertise in subdivision bylaws to really answer that question, although I know the schedules you're referring to, and I agree with you, Ian, on that regard. They may be, they pertain to Union Bay infrastructure for what it is, for what it's worth. So, and I understand, James, what you're saying as well. I wish I could identify where the differences are, but I can't. And that, because I can't, doesn't mean there aren't. Yeah.
Okay. Eve, any further thoughts on this? Like, what do you think is missing? And I know you were probably closer to any of us on this, right? So.
Well, I remember very little about, because it actually the project got going after my term was up. But again, to answer his question, I'd have to go through them all and pick it out. I don't know right off the top of my head. I do want to know why you can't just enact this bylaw and make it a CPRD bylaw, or with some update.
At this stage, we wouldn't be enacting a Union Bay bylaw. It would have to be something after conversion, and we'd have to really thoroughly understand the impacts of such detail. Chairman Rowe, to your comment on the schedules with the details, we don't have bylaws that have such specific details. What we do rely on, I might get Zoe to weigh in if she's familiar with this, or Tom maybe. What we do have, or what we do rely on, is municipal standard, MMCD, I think it is. It's municipal construction drawings, and there's a provincial standard around various requirements on municipal construction, government level construction. If Zoe's able to weigh, Zoe.
Yeah, James, I can kind of elaborate on that point a bit. So in our water bylaws, for anything where we're requiring an extension to the service or developer paid costs, we follow the MMCD, which is what James just mentioned. So it's the Master Municipal Construction Documents, and they're very standard. And it has a number of, typical details for what is a standard water connection, what is the offset of the water main, all of kind of those standard details. And that's what we fall back on. And that's what we do when we construct our own water mains. So it's kind of a standard for engineering that's kind of held to for not just water, but for also sewer and other projects. And so we don't quite have that schedule that you guys are referencing that shows kind of that MMCD. It's just kind of more or less, we want you to extend the water main and we're going to comply to the MMCD standard. And then we work with a developer to make sure that that is actually done, if that provides a bit more detail.
Thanks. So yeah, that's what I was, I don't have that same level of detail myself. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, those MMCD drawings or documents that that provide the description.
It's just a big book.
Yeah.
And then you can see there's kind of standard trench details and everything's in there.
Yeah, I know. I remember that because we had all this kind of, our old bylaws were just a big schmozzle of stuff. So we wanted to consolidate, and right on the, towards the end, it says on Schedule V, refer to the MMCD. So if your bylaws don't have that reference to the MMCD, what makes the developer have to comply with them?
Well, for most of our water servicing, we approve the design. So, and for water, I mean, it's just kind of industry standard that you would follow MMCD. I don't know if we actually have any, and James would know this better than me, it's just kind of, we review their design. If it doesn't comply to MMCD, we don't approve it.
Okay.
And would that change given the bylaws that we have as UBID? Would that, you know, the existing bylaws probably don't reference MMCD as I recall.
No, they don't.
So that would be something I would like to add. A specific reference to MMCD.
Well, let's ask, you know, what happens when a bylaw doesn't reference MMCD?
That's what I kind of tried to ask.
Yeah.
So our bylaw number 2866, it's our regulatory bylaw for the Comox Valley water system, which covers not the city and the town, but all of the rural areas outside of the city and the town that are supplied by the Comox Lake water, which is how many connections, Zoe? Upwards of
20,000.
20,000?
Yeah, well, 45,000 people, 20,000 connections.
Okay, minus the city and the town, because they would have their own, but so it's all those rural areas that are close to the city and the town. It does not reference the MMCD, but what it does say is that it enables the regional district to approve those water extensions and connections. And that is enough for us to cover and hold that responsibility.
Well, in my opinion, that doesn't quite protect a community from a huge development or a big developer, because how do I know the developer won't influence your committee? If it's in the law, then that's the law, the bylaw.
I can only speak for what our bylaws currently say and the practices that we follow.
Could we not, as a part of that transition, make a kind of statement, a motherhood apple pie kind of statement that we wish to proceed under the protection of MMCD? Just this is for the sake of the developers as well, so that they know this is the standard by which you will be expected to comply. I'd feel better if that was spelled out a little bit more transparently, as given the fact when you absorbed Royston, for example, or Sandwick, there wasn't a massive development at the doorstep. We are faced with one of those. So I think this is where the anxiety is coming from, is we just really want to be protected and make sure that developments going forward are done properly.
I'd just like to mention two related initiatives that, and I've communicated this to the board on a couple of my conversion updates. There's two initiatives that we're talking to the CVRD about, which are very much related, I think, to some of these concerns and issues you're talking about with respect to the subdivision bylaw. On the one hand, we've jointly approached Peter Johnson, Stuart McDaniel Stewart, who are solicitors for Union Bay, very familiar with the Union Bay Estates Agreement, very familiar with our bylaws, and also very familiar with the 2016 subdivision bylaw. What we've jointly asked him to do, and we just had a meeting with him today, is to basically review our bylaws that are in effect, the Union Bay Agreement, and give us some advice or an opinion on Union Bay water availability, any previous commitments that may have been made, to look at it from a legal perspective. The other thing that's happening too is we're in discussions with the CVRD, and I raised this in the context of what started out as 5-year capital planning. We're talking to CVRD Engineering, their water folks, about jointly engaging Coors Engineering, who are the UBID's engineering consultants, to do a capacity review of the water treatment plant, given the fact it's been up in operation now for 6-7 months. Basically, it's starting the process for some water master planning, but specifically to look at the capacity of our system and what would be required in terms of upgrades to not only the supply side, but also the distribution side, keeping in mind those two significant development applications. So we're kind of doing a bit of a two-pronged approach here, both from the legal side to look at any previous commitments that have been made and to identify any vulnerabilities and exposures that we need to know about, but also on the engineering side as well to identify what is the current capacity of the system, notwithstanding any of this other stuff. What would be required in terms of upgrades to the supply and the distribution system to accommodate these applications. And Coors, as you know, recently, within the last 5 months, has done 2 sets of reviews on each of these applications. So keep in mind that we're also dealing on those 2 fronts as well, which I think is very related to the issue of the subdivision bylaw and some of the concerns and gaps and exposures that you're a little bit sensitive to.
I'm actually just looking at subdivision water regulation consolidated bylaw number 176. And so I recognize that there's an amendment that I would probably need to look at. And there is a statement in this. So it's in section 4 under the section application. And it says every application for subdivision of land that will create a parcel to be connected to the district system must include a calculation of peak hourly water demand and pressure requirement for the ultimate development of the parcels and sufficient information, plans, and drawings for the district to determine whether the proposed works comply with this bylaw. These calculations and plans must be prepared by a registered professional engineer licensed in the province of British Columbia. So there's fairly specific language what it doesn't say, and it must comply with MMCD. And what I'm wondering is how would trustees feel if there was something noted that said this must we amend this bylaw or something, or CVRD passes something that just says that all connections to a water system must comply with MMCD. To me, it feels all right, like that there's some good provision in that. It just doesn't specify or give trustees perhaps enough teeth to say, well, this is why we're saying no. And if MMCD were referenced, I'd feel really good about that. I don't know how, Susanna, Eve, what do you think?
That sounds good to me. I kind of wonder, why was it not referenced, and maybe MMCD didn't exist at the time when these, I don't know.
2010, right? I would expect something did.
Yeah. Yeah.
But certainly even when I read this, you know, that a trustee may refuse to approve the proposed subdivision where the proposed subdivision does not comply with the provisions of this and other applicable bylaws of the district, or one or more parcels to be created by the subdivision are to be connected to the district system, and the district has an insufficient water supply to provide such parcels with a supply of water. So it's very clear that that we have protection about being forced to connect when we don't have the water supply. I could continue to read, but there's other places where you must pay for the infrastructure to connect, right? Perhaps it doesn't address, and I have to read further again, expansions to the plant, right?
Yeah, no, it does.
But you can still refuse to supply. We don't have the capacity. So then you enter negotiations.
Yeah, from my perspective, what I'm hearing is that there's a concern there on the part of the board members that, you know, in a perfect world, yeah, it would be nice if the CVRD were to enact after conversion, as soon as possible after conversion, something closely approximating, I guess, the UBID 2016 subdivision bylaw. And we can certainly, you know, I can take that sentiment back to the CVRD and have further discussions with them at the staff level. But from my perspective, I think this also links into the work that we're asking Peter Johnson to do in terms of looking at our existing bylaws, agreements, any previous commitments, and basically provide us with advice on, I think, from what I'm hearing, very much some of the concerns that you're expressing. Is there action that perhaps exposures, vulnerabilities that we need to know about moving forward post-conversion, that we, UBID, but also the CVRD need to know about it. So, you know, I'm hearing that general sentiment. I'm not a planner, so I don't fully understand the complexities that would be involved in doing that. But I think I can certainly go back to the CVRD and have further discussions with them in regards to, you know, what you've expressed, but also I think what the work that Peter's doing. And the good thing is that we're both working with Peter. So, and he's very familiar with some of this documentation. And, you know, let's see what he has to say about some of these issues moving forward. So by no means am I saying we just abandon the file at this stage, but more to follow is what I'm saying.
Eve, I noticed you wanted
thanks.
to add something.
Thanks, Ian. So Gary, I might have misheard, or I didn't hear, maybe that is he in his analysis of the old existing bylaws, is he going to compare them to this new one?
Well, you'll recall that he's the one that UBID asked to review the 2016 bylaw, and he came up with a number of proposed suggested amendments to it. So he's very familiar with the file.
Okay, so then what is this new thing he's going to do? So if that's the case, did we get that in writing, that his suggested proposed
Yes.
changes?
Yeah.
Yep.
That should have been circulated. That was circulated.
Yeah, that was previously circulated several months ago. So basically what we've asked him to do is to look at some of I've provided him with documentation related to the Upper Island Developments, Union Bay Estates applications, UBID's engineering consultant's comments. He's got the subdivision bylaw. He was integrally involved in preparing the agreement with Union Bay Estates. And he's reviewing that material at this point in time. So as again, I think that there's a real synergy here and a conversion of issues that he's going to be looking at and providing advice to us on that in terms of any particular commitments or concerns we should have moving forward in regards to water supply and availability for some of these developments.
Yeah, Eve, it's a 2017 legal opinion, and maybe Gary can send it to you again.
Could you please? I don't
Yep.
I don't remember. If it was
Sure.
months ago, I don't remember getting it. Thank you. And so, okay, so then we have good hard information about what the 2016 bylaw doesn't include, right? From his additions or corrections or whatever it is that he's.
I think the legal opinion we received was really to say what adjustments would have to be made to the language of the bylaw in order for the inspector to
approve it.
register it. Right,
Yeah.
so it was more about where we may have been
Overreaching.
overstepping our
Yeah.
authority as an improvement district.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But those
I-
are those are moot points now. Well,
Right.
or they will be by July 1st.
Yeah.
But I want to continue just to make sure that we know what is in our existing bylaw, right? There is another provision in here that says, despite subsection 1, which is the application section I read about not needing to approve, right? An application may be approved where the owner of the land provides to the district a reasonable proposal to increase the supply capacity of the district system so that it is capable of providing the parcels to be created by the subdivision with a sufficient supply of water. So that would be in the event that our DAF filters are at capacity and we can't service it, just like in our water infrastructure agreement with Union Bay Estates, that there's language around increasing the capacity of the plant. That's within the realm of the current bylaw, not the 2016 bylaw that we can do that. And the bylaw goes on further to say all costs must be paid by the developers. So, as I go through it, it really does come down to, don't build another Kilmarnock or Craig Darragh,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yes.
That's what I was just
That's
thinking.
what it
Yeah.
comes down to is let's have some quality pipes in the ground.
Right, because we own it and have to, after they build it, we then have to maintain it.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that's why it's important to have the MMCD, I think, referenced in any bylaw.
So perhaps, I could ask again back to CVRD to say, what is it that you've heard and what is it that's coming to mind for you that might give us that peace of mind around no more lousy infrastructure in the ground kind of idea?
I think what I've heard certainly is that real strong interest amongst you folk to ensure you're protecting your public assets, and those assets have been paid for by your ratepayers.
Yeah.
The reference to the MMCD and specifically naming it as your baseline documentation, I think is wise. It provides that extra layer of protection, and certainly, over the next couple of months here, as we work through more of the conversion tasks, I anticipate we'll identify some other matters that probably the UBID wants to put on the forefront for the CVRD on July 1st, including reference to the MMCD upon subdivision and development applications. Could certainly be one of those, and it would not be an extensive exercise to amend. I'm thinking probably amending your water regulations bylaw, not the former subdivision standard bylaw. I'm just looking at my notes. It would be your water regulations bylaw, which I think is number 226.
226.
Right.
And that would be a fairly straightforward exercise to do. just to put that additional certainty into your documentation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That sounds good to me.
Well, and we can certainly pursue this at the staff level in terms of any other details or issues that come to our attention, for sure.
So Susanna, you had made a motion and it was seconded. I guess we have been formally debating that motion and discussing the implications of it. Where are we at on that? Like that motion was to request that CVRD implement our proposed bylaw number. The number no, it's not 176, it's 264, right? That motion is on the table, or sorry, has been made. Do we want to table it? Like, does it need to be made? I think we've discussed it in a
I'm
different
okay with
way.
tabling. Sorry, I'm okay with tabling it based on the further conversation. Like, I think we can vote on it and it would die at this point.
Eve, are you okay with tabling it for now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Gary, any further comments, any further thoughts as to what we need to be doing here?
No, I don't think so at this time, Mr. Chairman. I mean, more to follow on this. I'm going to be reporting out on our discussions with Peter Johnson and also with what we're talking about with CVRD Water in terms of some master planning work. So more to follow on that.
Okay. Item
And
closed.
thank you, James, and staff. Zoe, it was very helpful. I feel better now.
Yes, thank you to all CVRD people, Ton, Zoe, James, thank you.
You're welcome. I think that we have our regular working group meetings, and so some of these topics will carry forward and wrap them up formally if we need to as that July 1st date gets closer.
Okay. You are welcome to hang in there for the rest, or you're welcome to disappear too. Yeah, up to you.
I might stay on just for, I think the next topic might be interesting, but I'll mute myself again here just so you don't see me. Thanks everybody.
All right.
I will
Thank you.
disappear. Thanks everybody for letting us attend. Nice to meet everybody, and have a nice long weekend.
Yeah,
Yes,
you too.
you too.
Appreciate your contributions. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll also disappear. So nice to meet you
Thank-
all and have
thank
a
you,
great
Zoe.
weekend.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye.
weekend.
But
Okay, back to the agenda. Okay, so item number 2 under unfinished business is the proposed separate office, washroom, staff room facility at a UBID water treatment plant. And there's certainly going to be a good update that comes from Gary on this and for us to comment on and discuss. I would like to add that there has been, some interest and questions asked from members of the public as well with respect to how did the decision get taken to not have an office and to not have a washroom associated with it. And the questions were specifically at the board level. If there's any knowledge, first off, if we're going to discuss that, I want to make sure that we're very clear that this is about board discussions, not about staff discussions. It's not about, naming staff members. It's not about naming members of the public, right? This is about what happened. Do we know what happened at the board level? Ted's not here, so, he would certainly have been a source of that. Susanna, I don't know if you were in board meetings that were, because I know you were excluded from certain meetings during that period at times. But I just, whatever we can do to clarify some of that would be helpful as well, because there's some interest in the history of the decision.
Yeah, I was excluded. I was suspended for several months. However, I did, thanks to my lawyer, still receive the minutes. So what I can speak to, and I read them thoroughly.
So if we could just not now, let's let Gary go.
Oh.
I just wanted to add that on to it, okay? So that we
Okay.
bring that into the whole package of our discussion. Let's let Gary lead it. And then
Sure.
I just wanted to put that out there so people could put some thought into it as part of this item because it wasn't listed in the agenda. Thanks for holding off on it for now.
Sure.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So I'll just kind of set the stage in terms of where we're at with this particular file. I'm going to focus on kind of, okay, so where do we go from here? We've got a couple of options and you know, I'd be a happy camper, I guess, at the end of this meeting if we're in a position where we've made a decision. Are we going to go down the build new building route, or are we going to go down the road of, you know, a portable, a modular unit of some way, shape, or form? You'll note
Gary,
that.
can I interrupt just to say that we've had Gary Roberts join us, and I just wanted to acknowledge him and welcome him to the meeting and make sure everybody knew he was on the call as well. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
Sure.
Graham, for attending. I did ask Graham to attend, and basically I'll ask him to sort of do his little update first. It's more the financial. Okay, where do we sit with you know, funding of the water treatment plant? And if we were going to go down this road, what would be the source of funds and the status of the reserves? And then he can basically book out. But I just want to sort of set the stage where we're at right now. So you'll recall that last year in the fourth quarter, I understand, based on a fairly basic design sketch that was prepared by Dan McGill, we did solicit some quotations for some modular portable units, call them what you will. I think we got 3 at the time. They were generally all in the range of about $89,000 to $95,000. And, you know, it was a bit of an apples and oranges that came back in terms of you know, what the components looked like, and the specs were kind of hard to compare. And it was a bit of an apples and oranges comparison. And it was a kind of, no criticism, but it was kind of a short, quick, let's get 3 quotes and see what comes back. And again, keep that number of $89,000, $90,000, $95,000 in your mind. Plus, of course, a bunch of potentially unknown costs to site the modular and to hook it up and to deal with other you know, engineering related issues. So so that was done last year on the basis of the sketch that was done by Dan. And we got a more recent quotation, which I've included in the package. I've also included in your package the basic sketch plan. We got a more recent quotation for a modular, which is quite a bit bigger than what we need. Dan solicited that. He got a lead on a potential availability of a unit from Coastal Installations. And that's in your package as well. And the cost again came in at around $90,000. Plus, though, a number of additional costs, transportation costs, $14,000, foundation engineering, $3,100, you know, ground anchors, that type of stuff. Plus, of course, building permit costs and engineering costs, which weren't included. So at the end of the day, it's really hard to pinpoint what we would be looking at, but I'm pretty comfortable in saying, and in my discussions with, you know, some of these suppliers and a designer, we'd be looking at something in excess of $125,000 all costs in for the modular. So that quotation was solicited back in early March. So I have heard the discussion, and what I've been trying to do is get a better handle on what might be the order of magnitude cost if we were to go down the other fork in the road, which was to build a new building. So I I've had some discussions with some designers. They're very busy, but I did circulate separately correspondence which I received from a local designer who has had some experience in building smaller type buildings of this nature. And he's kind of laid out, okay, if you want to go the build new approach, here's some steps that would be needed to be taken. First of all, prepare a basic concept design, and then include some costs for design development and tendering and that type of stuff. But I also asked him, I said, look, this may be an unfair question to you, but are you prepared to sort of, without, it's not a quotation, but in your experience, based on, the local environment now, the construction environment, the cost of lumber, what do you think would be the order of magnitude cost to build a new building? And what he said, his feeling is that the construction value could potentially be in the range of $350 to $400 dollars per square foot. He acknowledges that that's probably higher than we might have thought. It's certainly higher than I might have thought. And there's a couple of qualifiers in there. And he says that, the construction environment right now is very heated. There's high material costs and low availability. And we'd probably be paying a bit of a premium for a small building. But what he did say is if you want to go down that build new route, what he's advised is you spend a modest amount of money on a basic design that fits our needs, site specific to our needs. No, not too big, not too small, unique to what we require up there. That would be about in the order of $3,000 to do that basic design. And then you shop it around. You send it to, you send it to a contractor and get them to give you what's called a Class D cost estimate, which is really that would provide more firm information in terms of the cost. So keep in mind what seemed to have come back in our proposal or request for quotations for modular portables, around 90 to 95 plus. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but I'm sure you're looking at more than $125,000 or pretty darn close. And what the designer has said for the build new option, you could potentially be looking at $350 to $400 per square foot. And he's also laid out some other costs that you would have to include in that as well. So that's kind of where we're at. As I say, I see this as a bit of a discussion on what road should we take, the build new or the continue to pursue the portable, the modular. And if we were to decide to pursue the portable, the modular route, what I would recommend, and once again, the CVRD has been, quite helpful in this, is we do a more, I wouldn't say a formal, but we do a more robust request for quotations. We refine our specs a little bit, and I'd have to sit down with Dan and provide more detail in terms of, okay, if it's going to be a modular, here's the specs that are required and desired, and then shop it around, certainly spray the net much farther than we did the first time and see what comes back in terms of an RFQ. So with that, I'll stop there. I did ask Graham to just sit in to the first part of the discussion because it all comes down to money, right? Just to refresh everyone's memory where we're at in terms of funding of the sewer treatment, the water treatment plant, the status of our reserves right now, and where the potential source of funding might be. And I did include in your package just a one simple little sheet, which basically was called Water Treatment Plant Funding, outlining the current balance in our reserves, working capital, and in the shortfall in reserves. But if there's no further questions at this stage, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just give Graham an opportunity to speak briefly to that. And then he certainly doesn't, he's more than welcome to participate or sit in on the rest of the discussion about how we get there. But he's here basically to just give a quick snapshot financial overview. Graham.
Hi there. So yeah, earlier, I don't know, probably a couple months ago, Janice and Gary reached out to me just wondering what sort of money was left in the bank to fund such a project when we're talking about reserves. And I just sort of wanted to, first of all, just talk about the water treatment plant because it is not completely funded yet either. So what you see in that little spreadsheet I put together, these are all 2019 numbers here that we're using because the 2020 audit is not quite completed. So I didn't want to use 2020 numbers yet. But so 2019, the first column there, the cost at that point for the water treatment plant was 3.3 million. Of which 700 was funded out of reserves and
Sorry.
just over 1.5 million from bank debt. So that was leaving about 1.1 million at December of last year's that hasn't been funded. So we look at the current year. So that cost there, it's pretty much, I think the cost, I don't think that number has changed throughout our audit of what the full cost of the water treatment plant was the almost $5.4 million. Again, so that reserve that was funded last year, that was still funded, whatever. And the bank loan was maxed out at $3.5 million. So the water treatment plant, as we stand right now, has not been fully funded. That almost $1.2 million has not been funded. So that was that's one thing we think about, and the board needs to think about. Then the actual reserves balance, you can see that below that little table, there's a reserve balance. So you have your water capital expenditure charges, reserve balance at the end of last year, or 2019, of 300,000. Then the water renewal of 525, that was the ending balance at December 2019. That was after applying that 700,000 above. Then you obviously got your fire renewal of 1.4 and some non-operational, non-stat reserves of $129,000. So that's your total reserve balance. I think when I was talking with Gary, he said, well, how was it funded? The water treatment plant, the Unity Improvement District had a strong cash balance because these reserves were sitting in cash, basically, or term deposits. So when the operation or the funding of the water treatment plant was going on, I think there wasn't a need to borrow because you had the money, but you've been internally borrowing from yourselves. And so you can see that when you look at your total working capital. So you have your reserve balances, total reserve balance is 2.4, and your working capital, so your cash, your investments less your payables and your deferred revenues, shows a shortfall of over $500,000. So you've been borrowing from your internal reserves, so your reserves aren't fully funded. So when it came to how much money do we have to spend, we don't really have much, if anything, right? So I think there is some room there. I think the thing that is come about as part of the audit, I forgot about the last year through the Kinston Water Agreement, they contributed $117,000 as part of the water treatment plant. These are for cost overruns to allow for the expansion of it. Those numbers haven't been funded, but the 117 was based on an estimate of $93,000, but the funding of it was for an additional 25% just in case. So that number needs to be finalized, but let's say it's 100,000. So that makes that shortfall for the water treatment plant less 100,000, but I think the board needs to figure out how to fund the rest of that. Is that additional borrowing, or are we going to be accessing some additional reserves for the water renewal or the CEC charges if possible? And then tying into that is this discussion about what needs to be done to get the modular or other building to support the water treatment plant.
I'm not quite sure I understand the lower half of this page.
Thank you. I don't either.
In
Yeah.
that, so the reserve balances say this is what we have in reserve.
Yes, so those are reserves, and those are amounts from the financial statements last year. So you've been setting aside money for these future projects, so your capital expenditure reserves. So that's when you charging developers to add capacity or future capacity. So that's the ending balance of what that fund should be.
So that's the operative word, should.
Should be. That's how much money you've collected, but it's not how you have less money than what you've collected.
So that isn't where the money lives, like the actual green dollars are in investments and cash and accounts receivable. So there's no like segregated fund. My understanding every time I'd seen the balance sheet was those were segregated funds, that they were set aside, that dollars were there. And you're saying that's not true. That's just my impression. It's not that you've lied to me or anything.
You've been internally borrowing from yourselves.
Yeah, and the other thing that had come to my attention along the way was that I always in my early days on the board heard an amount of $4.2 or $4.3 million for the water treatment plant, and what I came to understand was that was contract number 3, and that there was 2 contracts that went before for site preparation and acquisition of equipment that were essentially the not funded amount that's there, the $1.2 million.
Okay.
And that I guess it had been played to me that they had been come out of that money had come out of operational reserves or operating funds, and I guess that's really what you're saying, is it has been,
well,
but it's not funded by it, so we cannot fund our reserves right now.
Correct.
How did this happen that we can't fund our reserves?
So last year, 2019, again, so you can see there's an unfunded portion. I wasn't worried as the auditor at that point last year because the project had been completed. I wasn't privy or knowledgeable where the final borrowing amount would be and whether further access to the renewal reserve would happen and so forth. So wasn't too concerned last year, but it's definitely an issue now.
I'd say so. So not only do we have to fund an office of 125,000 plus, we have to figure out how to fund $1.175 million. So we're talking about $1.3 million, not $125,000.
Wow.
Yeah. So the office is the small potatoes, really, when you look at the bigger picture. So that's why I wanted, when I was talking to Gary and Janice, was there's a bigger picture than just the office.
Yes. Exactly.
Oh my God. So how do we reconcile this? This is.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I kind of have one that goes before it too, right? Which is, how did we really get here?
Yeah.
Like I understand this idea of that we had 3 contracts. But those 3, when you look at the Corps engineering, and it came out in the Freedom of Information request that was asked, that a landowner had asked for, and that we documented, that there were 3 contracts that added up to this value of $5.4 million. We knew about that right from the beginning, yet there doesn't seem to have been a funding plan for it. And I'd like to know how we got there, how those decisions were made.
Yeah, I would like to know that too. And I've been the longest standing board member. Oh, this is awful.
So Graham, my question to you, setting aside conversion for the moment, if conversion wasn't part of the picture, what would you, this is something that you would be identifying in the management letter, would you? And is there a particular course of action that you would be recommending or insisting on?
I think it's probably moving forward, you need to look at your rates structure a little bit more, and you know, your parcel tax may need to be increased with some additional borrowing to fund some of the deficit potentially. Those are your sort of your options, combination of those two.
Mhm.
So using
just-
up what other reserves you have.
Which we need because our infrastructure in the ground
Yep.
is,
Absolutely.
Question about the
Ugh.
parcel tax. Is it still going to, I had a landowner ask me if the CVRD will still be charging us parcel tax. You know, does anybody know?
nothing changes with respect to our revenue sources, right? We still need the revenue to cover the cost
Right.
of borrowing and all those sorts of things. I guess James could tell us the mechanics of it, but my assumption
My
is-
understanding is that the CVRD would, yeah, the parcel taxes would continue to be charged, but they're rolled into the provincial taxes.
What does that mean? You
They,
mean it'll be on our property tax bill?
yeah.
Yeah.
On the
So
property.
they won't get a separate bill.
Starting in, yeah, there wouldn't be my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that in 2022, there wouldn't be a separate parcel tax invoice or bill sent out in January. It would be part of your property tax bill that you get in May, June, or whatever.
Okay. Okay, well, that'll work good for our over 55 landowners who defer their taxes. Now they can defer their parcel tax.
But Mr. Chairman, this is why I thought it would be, this needed to be brought to your attention in the context of this, decision we're going to make in terms of the office. Clearly, it's an issue that needs to be very much discussed and sorted out in the context of that moving forward.
Well, what I'm greatly concerned with is how we got here and the explanation that the landowners deserve to understand that we're now having this conversation when it should have been happening 2 years ago in terms of sources of funds.
I have to offer one way that we got here was that the boards, whoever they were, should have been raising all the rates year after year, every year. The rates should have been raised in order so that we're not in this situation. It seems
Well,
pretty clear.
I agree with that component, but there's a lack of clarity as to, there was no decision taken to fully fund this plant as far as I can tell.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm very upset by this. I feel like the landowners and the board were misled. You pointed out very clearly, it was never $4.2 million. It was 4.2 plus another, the board of which I was a minority was never transparent to the landowners about the costs, ever.
Well,
Not even,
I don't even know if it was a board issue or whether the board would have been made aware of.
that's what I'm saying. We weren't made aware because it was never brought to the table as a board.
Yeah, there's.
I don't understand how the board couldn't know about the money they were approving being spent.
It was
and
never
the
being
rate
asked.
they were charging.
Well, I guess there's
Who's
some,
responsible?
to me, there's some forensics to be done here to say what was put in front of the board. Did the board see the full $5.3 million? Were there
No.
some expenditures that were approved as operating expenses by administration that didn't get funded by the board or didn't get approved by the board. We need to understand this. And certainly, like if I am a landowner, but the landowners who aren't sitting at the table right now would be kind of going, you need to tell us this.
Yeah. I agree. I want to see forensic done on this too. The $5.3 million was never put on the table ever as a trustee. And I've been a trustee since October 2016. It was always 4.2. Like I said, the one public meeting that was held, even that meeting was based on a 4.2 number of the cost of the water treatment plant. And even those numbers were wrong. It has been so egregious what.
So the interesting thing is Corps Engineering knew that the cost was $5.3 million. Because we have a breakdown from Corps Engineering and from a Freedom of Information request based on the quotes that were received and I believe presented to the board.
Well, I'd like to see that. I don't believe it was presented to the board, but I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. Gary, do
On the
you
other
remember
hand-
that? Remember those there are three contracts, right?
Yes, and the figure of 5.3 has always been my understanding of what it was. I'd have to go back, but yeah, Coors did present some. They went back and they looked at these three contracts in the context of that FOI request, and yeah, the 5.3 number is what I recall, certainly.
But even if we do find out what happened, it's not going to solve our problem right now.
No, it's not, but we need to know and the landowners deserve to know what happened.
Absolutely. And why did the 5.3 number only come forward as a result of an FOI request? Why wasn't the board like?
I don't want to jump to conclusions on that. I want to see from the minutes of meetings what was brought forward,
Yeah,
right?
Me
What was
too.
brought to the board.
yeah. Oh, boy.
Because Corps Engineering obviously understood the full cost of the program.
Wow.
Well, what about the auditor? How come you didn't say something?
Can I
Or
say
did you?
something?
What?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yes, you may.
So during the FOI, I was pulling the documents together, and that's when I found the document from Coors saying how much it was. And I looked on the balance sheet and they agreed. So I got a hold of Ian and I got a hold of Graham and said, there's a problem. It's not a $4.2 million plant. So Graham wouldn't have known about it because the plant was not finished until the middle of 2020.
Okay.
So that's why he didn't know. So ever since that conversation, he's delved into it and.
But Janice,
And for greater clarity with that, right, is that Janice and I had that conversation. And my understanding was that contrary to my belief that it was a 4.3, it was a $5.3 million plant, and that the additional $1 million had been funded from operating surplus. And what that's now saying is, and because there'd been a lack of transparency around financial statements for a fairly long period of time where information wasn't coming to the board, it was feasible to me that there was an operating surplus. And I, of course, am too ignorant of the rules of funding as to whether that's even appropriate to take a financial surplus or an operating surplus and apply it to a capital project like that. But that's how it was relayed to me, is that we had taken operational surplus, and that my understanding was that the board would have been aware of that, or that it would have been an appropriate action for the administrators to be able to pay for it in that way. But I want to make sure that for anybody that's everybody that's on this call, that Janice did bring this to me in that way. We spoke about whether it, and we just said, well, that's how it was funded. It was from operations. Our balance sheet is fine. this is the first time I've looked at it and said our balance sheet isn't fine. Because the reserve numbers that are represented actually are kind of, they're not funded. They're, I thought there was money in accounts. There is no money in those accounts, or not fully funded amounts in the account.
How come this
So
didn't come through
Janet,
as
can I
budget?
just, Janice, the letter that you referenced that were the 5.3 million from Coors, what's the date on that letter?
I don't have it in front of me.
Just ballpark.
I'm not comfortable doing a ballpark. It's
Okay.
basically in water treatment plant docks that went up to the regional district.
Okay, well,
it
what
was-
I'm,
Gary, it was part of that FOI, so I'm not sure if you can remember what period that covered.
no, I can't. What I'm getting at
talking to
is,
Gary.
Second half of 2020.
Right.
Yes.
what I'm getting at is that, to my knowledge, the board never saw that Coors letter. That's why I want to know the date of that letter, because that would tell you who, what, when. Could you find that? I would,
No, I think we're perhaps confusing you, Susanna, in that the Coors letter was in response to the FOI request, which was the second half of last year. They went back into
Okay,
their
I get it.
files and looked at what had been spent on the water treatment plant, and they documented that there were 3 contracts that added up to $5.3 million.
okay, so this is where it slid through the cracks, is that never has there been a comprehensive comprehensive financial, this is what, those 3 contracts were never laid before the board clearly to say, look, folks, it wasn't 4.2 million. It was this plus this plus this. That was never brought forward to the board.
Well, how did it get approved then? Without the board's approval?
That's what we need to find out.
That's what we need to find out. I'm saying it never came before the board. And I have a pretty good memory on what, I did do my due diligence in terms of reading all the minutes.
Would it even have been possible to spend that kind of money without the board's approval? Is that even legal?
Well, they would have
I don't
signed
know.
off on it. Someone would have signed off on it.
Exactly, that's my point.
And when you say signed off, Janice, you mean the check, or you mean?
Yes.
So
Whatever payment
The
is,
chair.
and it was a check, it would have been signed off on by the administrator and a board member.
not the chair, just any board member?
Well,
Anybody
no,
with signing authority.
Signing authority.
Yeah.
correct.
Oh, God, okay. This is terrible. Wow. And we have the last AGM ever of Union Bay, and people need to know this. It is what it is. We can't change it, right? We need to fix it. So can we move for, personally, I think you guys have a washroom, it's in a trailer. We need to figure out how to rectify. Right now, for me, the priority of the washroom has just fallen off the list of things to do.
Because we have a unsolved financial issue here, I don't want to get dramatic about what I might label it, does not change the fact that our employees deserve
Yeah,
and we're probably required to give our employees a better facility than they have.
Absolutely.
yes, no, I understand. I agree.
So.
I
that-
agree.
So in other words, getting back to the whole idea of whether we're gonna build or get a modular. Can we just talk about that? For
Yes.
a minute, and
Well, can we maybe just time out there, like where Graham has done what Graham came here to do. What's our path forward on this piece before we get to that decision? What do we need to do to understand this? How do we get what happened? And then how do we get, what do we do about it? Graham, I don't know if you have some guidance there. Gary, if you have some thoughts.
So just a backtrack on the accounting thing. So if it's not funded through reserve or borrowing, it has to be, you paid for it. So by default, the default is your operating account. So you can see, I think that shortfall reserves is almost what the deficit is in the operating fund. So if you look at 2019's number, that $1.1 million was charged to operating as a temporary holding place. The project was ongoing, like, additional funding was going to be used through loans and other sources. So that was charged to operating last year, which resulted in a deficit in the operating fund of $500,000. So it's not, yeah. So the operating is underfunded too, because it's that $500,000. It's so in effect, it's a 60,000 issue for the current year. We still need to resolve that last year's kind of idea, last year's unfunded piece, and that can be funded through a variety of means, being accessing some additional reserves or additional borrowing.
So I think what I just heard you say is last year we had a $542,000 issue. This year we have a $600,000 issue. Because of the additional not funded shortfall from 2020.
Yeah, it still needs to, it can be dealt with. Yeah.
It's $600,000 we're dealing with. Is that true?
No,
542
it's still the 1.2 is the actual issue. Then of that 1.2, a portion of it can be charged to operating fund. But if you charge the whole amount, your operating deficit would be about 600,000.
Right. We could charge about $575,000 to operating.
Yes.
We still have to fund $600,000+.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman, in terms of your question of a path forward, I certainly, this is why I wanted to bring this issue, to your attention before we started marching too far down a road in terms of, a further capital acquisition. Really, I don't have any silver bullets at this point in time. We've got the AGM coming up at the end of April. I'd certainly want to have further discussions with the auditor in regards to, the implications of this and advice or recommendations on a path moving forward. Given the fact that, conversion is imminent, I'd want to have a discussion with the CVRD. So certainly their finance people are, up to speed on this. And I have been communicating with them in regards to where this particular project, the washroom, change room component currently sits, and my strategy in terms of trying to make a decision on what road we're going to go down. So really, I think at this point in time, best to leave it with us in terms of consultations with the auditor, with the CVRD on a path moving forward. I think that, you could still have the larger discussion of, okay, clearly there's got to be a longer term solution to this office washroom, change room issue. Clearly the status quo in the long term is not really an option, what's there now. We do have access to that trailer, I understand, for this summer tourist season. They're not going to yank it from under our feet. My advice would be if we could get to a point where maybe we make a decision, at least in principle, that subject to the funding issue being further explored and a path forward resolved. Subject to that, in principle, the board would be supportive of going down one of two particular roads.
Mm-hmm.
And if that road is a portable, then what I could be doing is I could be developing a more thorough request for quotations, which at the appropriate time, we could, shop around to a much larger group of suppliers. And I have a number of contacts that have come to my attention in the last couple of months. So that's my best advice at this point in time. Yeah, clearly it wasn't adding up to me in terms of the sources of funding. And I've had a couple of discussions with Graham about it. And that's why I wanted him to sit in on this. But I think what we need to do is chart a path forward on two issues: the funding issue, but also the the solution issue in terms of the building versus portable.
I would go one step further. There's three issues. Is we have to get out of the funding problem, but we need to understand how the funding problem came to be. This cannot just be swept under the rug and not explained. It must be explained. And so, if we need a motion to direct you to do that, and, you might have to then fulfill or come back to us and tell us, what resources you need to be able to do it. I don't want this one going past our board to the CBRD without an explanation.
Yeah,
This is not the way to leave it.
I'll second that
Awesome.
motion.
So the motion I would make, and we can and Gary, I want your thoughts on it as well, right? But I would to direct the administrator to prepare a report summarizing the events and actions that led to the underfunding of the water treatment plant.
Yeah. I'll second that.
Love to start the discussion with Gary as to say, what are your feelings on that? I just can't let this go.
Well, Mr. Chairman, to be honest, that is a significant, it strikes me as a significant piece of work that would entail a review of all of the electronic records, the documents pertaining to the water treatment plant, past minutes, what was brought to the board, past reports. I know that, in my experience with that previous FOI request, which was, significant, it was challenging to piece some of that information together, no question. And that's why we asked Coors Engineering to give us a snapshot of the cost of those three contracts. So I'm concerned about, I respect the motion, but to be honest, I'm very concerned about, the resources that would potentially be required and the time and effort that we would be required to do that, to put together essentially an what you're doing is you're going back and trying to reconstruct history in terms of how we got here. A significant piece of work, no question about it, and would have, given the fact that we're very significantly involved in conversion issues, it would be a challenge, and I'd have to figure out how we would get that done. And COVID, working out of home remotely is not conducive to an exercise like that.
Okay, thank you. Susanna.
Well, it's really only 3 years of minutes. I know what the minutes are.
It's not really 3 years, right? It's probably 1 year to really get to this part of the paper trail, I would think, right? Because it's from the time you say, let's get at it. That's probably 2018 when you're doing site preparation and those sorts of things.
Yeah. It's not like there's information hidden everywhere. There are minutes and they exist and they're electronic and they're available. I can tell you nothing of the nature was ever put forward to the board, but we don't know that until we look. And maybe this wouldn't be so important, Gary, and I understand your concern, but we have the final annual general meeting of Union Bay ever, like it's dissolving. I do feel we owe an explanation to the landowners on how we made such a big mistake.
Can I jump in?
Yep, please.
Okay, I can completely concur with Gary. It's a lot of work. So why can't someone else do it, like a couple of board members? Or
Well,
even a member of the public and a board member? You know, why does it have to be the staff?
Or an auditor.
Why do we have to pay for this service? Why can't the board member and an interested public member who's very resourceful maybe and could help us do it? Why do we have to have Gary do it? He's got his hands full.
I will defer to Gary to answer his thoughts.
Is that a
on-
contractual union contract issue, perhaps?
I doubt that. It's more of a governance versus, the political versus administrative side, but I'm not against it. But Gary, I'd love your thoughts on whether
No,
we have a committee.
it would typically be a staff function. I mean, on an FOI request, for example, that's what that often entails, is going back through paper records, electronic records, doing a lot of that legwork. And basically your choices are either that's done by the existing staff using the resources that they have, or you augment and bring in somebody else to go through that work, and you set the parameters and the instructions. It's not something that I would really recommend be done by individual board members. I think it's a staff function or a contractor consult function. And my first thought at this point in time is deep concern about the implications of this in terms of what else we've got on our plate with respect to conversion activities and some of our strategic priorities. So, I may have to come back with a recommendation that we hire somebody who, and not that it's a FOI request, but somebody who comes from that background and with proper instructions and access to records be put on the task of reconstructing and piecing those sequence of events together. And there would be a cost to that.
I do get that, but my feeling right now is that now that this discussion is out in the open, if we don't do it, there will be an FOI request.
Although I would rather see our staff time be put towards the B parcels.
Well, I'd rather, us continue to go down the list of the priorities, but I can't, my conscience doesn't allow me not to understand this.
So Graham, my question to you is, at the AGM, this will be noted as part of the financial statements, the audit report, and something that would be in a management letter. And I think you've partially answered the question. Basically, you would be, correct me if I'm wrong, bringing this to our attention and recommending or directing that certain steps be taken, such as raising parcel charges, re-examining our water rates, any other, because it's not an illegal expenditure per se, is it? It's just something, it's an underfunding deficit issue that needs to be resolved in terms of financial accounting best practices. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Like the contracts were all approved by the board. I'm pretty sure we checked that. So signing the contracts and payment and contracts were all above board, but I just don't think the funding discussion was ever fully had.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to see that part. I'd love to be clear that the board did approve all three contracts. That certainly would be part of this, right? And then beyond that, it becomes, how did the funding get missed? Graham?
Yeah,
do
I
you
certainly
remember how
remember
much-
approving the land clearing contract and then the Ridgeway building of the plant. There's a third contract that I don't recall, like that the board did approve those two. I'm not sure which the third one is.
The third one is the acquisition of the AWC equipment, which goes into the Ridgeway
Oh.
plant.
Yeah, and I believe that's probably, that those two seem to never be separated out as two.
Okay, so that's fine. They were awarded as two contracts.
But
Yeah,
so on the assumption then, and I'm not going to assume anything, but let's just say that, let's assume that the board did approve 3 contracts. We're not talking about an illegal expenditure.
mhm,
We're talking about something that clearly may not be financial funding best practice and something that needs to be addressed moving forward. Is that correct, Graham?
That's how I see it, yes.
Okay.
What, could I ask you a question? What portion of our parcel taxes relates to debt repayment? Do you remember? Do you have those numbers?
Not off the top of my head, no, sorry, I don't. I think it was about, I don't want to speculate.
Okay.
But basically the increase in the parcel tax in 2020 was to pay the debt.
Yes, and
Yes.
but there's also an element of the parcel tax that goes towards reserve funds.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
just trying to figure out what the debt part is, because then we could figure out, what are we talking about in terms of parcel taxes to get there, right? Like it's a 20% increase to pay for an additional $730,000, including an office. It's a 20% increase in that debt servicing. So if it's 300 of that $390, then we're talking about $60 a year per house.
Your math is quicker in your head than mine.
yeah. That's gonna be a hard sell.
Well, it's not a sell, it's a have to, right? But
Yeah,
like it
yeah.
certainly requires a lot of understanding that it's a hardship.
Yeah. And I think that's why we need the background, kind of how this happened in order to make our case, because it's a tough case. Could I switch gears to the question Gary proposed regarding the direction of portable or,
Can we decide on this motion?
yes,
Are we directing Gary to prepare this analysis or not? That's the motion's there. I think somebody seconded it because we were talking about it.
yeah, I did.
Are we directing Gary to prepare a report summarizing the events and actions that led to the underfunding? Or given this idea that we say, hey, the contracts were approved, we know that.
Yeah,
Are we saying we don't need to do that piece of work? So I guess like we can go around that one more time. Does anybody have anything to add to it? Should we vote on whether we do this or not? Gary is advised against it, or said, not advised against, but said it's a big piece of work that would disrupt other activities.
I'm not going to vote in support of it, given what we've said. I do think the board did approve those 3 contracts, but it was never, transparency around the total cost of build out was never made clear to the board or to the landowners. And now yeah, so I would vote, if we're going to go to a vote, I'll vote. Not that it wouldn't be important. We kind of have, I think, a summary of going, this is where, I'll just shut up.
So you're voting yay or nay?
I'm voting no.
Okay, Eve?
Well, I would like it done, but Gary has said he doesn't have the time to do it. So I'd hate to force him to do it, and I don't think he should have to do it. Just because he says that somebody else can't do it doesn't mean it can't be done by other people. So I'm still on that. I think it should be done, but I think it should be done by other people that aren't going to cost the community more money. That's
So
what
I hear you proposing an amendment to a motion. Which saying perhaps that we form a committee to prepare.
You got it. And you know what? Because the buck is going to fall on us. We're going to be the ones going, it wasn't us. We didn't do it, but your property taxes and your rates are going up. But everybody will think it's our fault because that's how politics is. So it's
if-
screwed either way.
So if I
Anyway.
amend the motion to say to form a select committee to prepare a report summarizing the events and actions that led to the underfunding of the water plant. Would that be a motion that the amendment that you'd be looking for?
Yeah, I would support that.
So that motion's on the floor now amended. Second,
Second,
okay.
or yeah.
Susanna, I'll cycle back to you. Are you in favor of that motion? Or
Yeah, I'm in favor of the motion, but I cannot work on the committee. I have
So
too many
vote-
other.
So vote for the motion first, and we can then have a motion to say who's going to be the chair of the committee.
So, I vote for the motion.
Okay. Eve,
Yeah, vote in favor.
I vote in favor as well. So that motion is passed. So next would be to nominate a trustee to be the chair of the select committee to do this. I nominate Eve.
Oh, boy.
Second,
Put my foot that one.
second.
You can nominate me, but I have conditions.
Any other nominations?
Ian, no, whatever.
I will withdraw. I cannot do it. I am overcommitted as it is.
As am I. As am I. So then it becomes a committee of one.
Well, no,
Or, no, there's public members too.
Okay, yeah.
so if this committee will have to be able to ask for people to be on it, I can't think of the word right now, but advertise for participation and also have the cooperation of the acting administrator and Janice. What is she, the deputy administrator?
So the cooperation of the staff.
Yeah. And also getting maybe a member or two of the public to help, because I can't just be me.
Select committee can consist of one or more board members, members of the public, members of staff.
Okay.
Okay, so all in favor of Eve being the chair of the select committee?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, sorry to, we had to do that. Okay, shall we move on to the reason we started talking here?
Yes, I'd like to answer the question Gary proposed of build or portable, and I say build.
Any further comments? Eve
On
or Susanna, you want to say more?
just, a 500,000 square foot building, even at $300,000 per square foot, to me makes more sense building it than a portable in terms of asset management and depreciation. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Eve,
I couldn't tell what the the dimensions of, and the drawing that Danny or that you have provided here, but if it's 20 by 30 or something like that.
Danny had originally said 12 by 36, I think, wasn't it?
12 by 36, yeah.
432 square feet.
But that was based on a trailer idea.
Well, that's the modular component,
Yeah.
right?
So he needs about 450 square feet roughly.
400 to 450, somewhere in there, yeah.
450 max.
So that's at building, and for even at 400 per square foot, that's 180,000. So you're going to look at about 225 to 250,000 to build.
It's probably somewhere, it's north of, well, if it's a 400 square, if it's $400 a square foot, then it's
Yeah.
going to be about 175,000 to build that building.
But he did say
Plus
in
whatever
that,
costs additional, right?
in that thing that Gary provided in one of his emails from that man, what's his name, Matthew, somebody, he said there were other costs and also all of the fees preliminarily and all that. So, yeah, I'm thinking 225 to 250.
No,
That's double what a modular unit would cost, but I also, yeah, I guess, gag, and we have no money. I don't know. I don't like the idea of a modular, but I can't stand the idea of spending that much money, but I guess that's what I would go for, is build.
well, I do not believe it will be $400 a square foot for a washroom and an office. I just don't. But maybe it is. However, I still think building is the way to go. Those costs of permitting, that's just standard permitting process. Those are all stuff that anybody building has to go through. So,
So
but the sooner
advantages
we
of-
get the tenders out, the better, for sure.
So if I was to speak on this, I would say the advantages of modular are timeliness and cost. The advantages of build and a significant advantage on cost, I believe, and cost is a big issue right now. We just talked about needing to raise parcel taxes to raise another $730,000 with a buy option. It would be $800,000 or more with a build option. So I think the cost is a big one for me. And the timing is a big one for me too, is to say, like, construction right now is raging in the valley. I don't know if we would be able to commit to a timeline. And the advantages of build, certainly there is built for purpose, getting the envelope and the shape of the building optimized. And I don't know if, certainly all buildings depreciate, whether built or bought. A modular building, my guess is, would depreciate faster because it's not as solidly built or whatever, but I'm speculating when I say that. But all buildings depreciate, not land appreciates, buildings depreciate. I am not in favor of the build option. I'm in favor right now of giving the staff a facility that gives them what they need to do their jobs and to do them in a comfortable way. But I do not believe that we need to spend more money at this time to get there. We should do it at the lowest cost we can. That would be my comment.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've switched. You're right. It's ludicrous to think that we could spend all that money. I would vote for the modular right now if the vote happened right now.
So we're basing this on costs that are just speculative. The $400 per square foot, that is not a fixed cost. And
No.
I do not believe it would be that much. So for example, $300 a square foot for a 400 square foot building is 120,000.
And it's equivalent.
Yeah. So until I see a quote with that actual cost per square foot printed, what we know is that the temporary one also is going to, we've already been told, will be around $120,000. I still think it could be built, a 400 square foot washroom office could be built for $120,000. I really do. But
Okay.
that's my,
My additional comments would say that I believe that Gary has done reasonable due diligence at the level he's capable or able to do it right now, in that he went to an expert, and that expert was able to ballpark and then to explain why that ballpark, that estimate of $350 to $400 a square foot was appropriate. So I don't have any information beyond that of an expert that would allow me to take a risk to say, I think we can save more money. I think we need to make a decision on an approach. And that approach right now needs to be fiscally responsible. That's my opinion. We all get to vote, right? It's just, I think we all need to express ourselves and hear each other and say, does anything resonate?
why can't we do both? Why can't we put out a tender for a built and a portable?
Well, one of the things the designer recommended is that, you know, if we're going to further investigate or go down the road of a build new option, that we would need to have a plan, you know, a concept design done, not by an architect. We don't need an architect, but we need a professional designer to prepare a design. And that's what he said, is that you invest, you know, and he said a budget for $3,000 for this work. We would recommend a construction company be hired to provide a Class D cost estimate. So his strategy would be invest a modest amount of money in preparing a design for a build new building, and then take it to a construction company and ask them to provide a Class D cost estimate, because that will be the best refined estimate you're going to get in terms of, okay, here's the outside cost of this particular project. So that's certainly what he's recommending. Is we could do a RFQ for a portable on the basis, you know, of Dan's construction sketch. If we refine the specs a little bit more and shop it to a wider market of modular suppliers. But if we're going to go down the road of a build new building, we need to prepare a basic concept design so that we can take it to a construction company, get a Class D cost estimate, and then, you know, take it to other construction companies to shop it around and see what they come back with.
So I suggest we do that. That way we can pursue both options and we can present, then we're making an informed decision.
Eve, any further comments?
Well, if that could work without costing too much money, yeah. That would
We
be
have to
good.
have a drawing, whether it's modular anyway.
Not really. Gary said we don't,
No.
like that. The modulars, they're going to say these are our floor plans.
So it means an investment of $3,000, which we may not then use if we decide it's cost too much or whatever.
Essentially, I think, yeah.
My other concern is an investment of time that we may not have, given the conversion schedule, and you know that this then becomes a CVRD file instead of a UBID file, and you know.
Well, plus if we decide to build, it would take weeks before anything happens. It takes forever to do these things. So it's going to be the CVRD doing it anyway. If it's build, it's going to take a while just to get the modular on the site.
Yeah, I concur with that. I think that certainly the build new option, that there's no way that that would be completed by conversion. With the modular portable option, perhaps if we get an RFQ out and, there's an able supplier, it's all based on availability. Perhaps we could have that in place by July 1st. But in my opinion, even that would be extremely doubtful. So that's why, I've involved the CVRD. They're in the loop in terms of where we're going with this. They haven't expressed an opinion in terms of either option. They would just like us to obviously advance this as far as we can take it, given the current market and other constraints.
I have no further comments. Anything further from Susanna or Eve, or should we? I guess the motion. What is the motion that we want to have? That we direct the administrator to pursue both a build and a buy option, or is it that we direct the administrator to pursue a build or a buy only option?
I personally still feel it should be build or buy. Frankly, if we had pursued that option vigorously in the fall, it seems like it went in the direction of a portable without there ever being a thorough discussion about, anyway.
There has been now, so that's good. So I guess let's.
However, I'm just one.
Before we form let's just vote on. Susanna, do you say build and buy? Eve, do you say build and buy or buy only?
Buy.
And I would like to say buy only as well.
All right, then it's done. It's voted, I'm outvoted. That's fine.
Gary, are you okay with that? Do you need a motion any more than that from us?
I think there should be a motion, which would need to be ratified at the next regular board meeting, of course, because this is just committee of the whole. But yeah, some sort of a motion, perhaps, if you're prepared to do that at this time, giving me an indication of what particular option you would prefer we pursue, so that I can start putting my mind to, okay, it'll be an RFQ for a portable building.
So motion to direct the administrator to pursue an option or pursue purchasing a modular unit to function as an office and washroom for the water treatment plant.
Make that motion.
I'll second it. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
All against, say nay.
Hey,
Okay, there we go.
and just to be clear to the staff, I'm not opposed to them having a washroom.
That's good.
That's very nice.
Yeah. So the last piece of this discussion was, and Susanna, I think this falls on you, is just to say, what were you aware of as the discussions to build the water treatment plant were going on, in reference to an office and a washroom? What was going on at the board, and what decisions were taken with that in that regard?
The words office and washroom never entered the conversation at any point formally with the board. I attended meetings with Coors Engineering around the water treatment plant. The plans always contained the water treatment plant. There was never an office or a washroom on those plans, or brought up in discussion at any point by staff, like, hey, what about a washroom? Nothing.
Okay, so this became an add-on later in your recollection.
That's what I'm saying. Even when it was, when the oops was discovered, so to speak, it was still never brought to the board. Hey, by the way, we don't have a washroom or an office. That's what I'm upset about. It was never brought, the omission was never brought forward to the board.
There seems to have been some discussion that's come forward that it was brought forward by staff saying, hey, what about? And that it became a budget issue, that there's no money in the budget to add a washroom and an office.
That was never brought, that's what I'm saying. That point exactly, I do not recall any board discussion about that. There may have been administrative discussion about it, but it was never brought forward to the board formally as an issue to be ruled on one way or the other. Or planned for, right? You know, how are we going to pay for it in the future?
Okay.
And this is very upsetting to me. And
So-
it kind of goes back to where my upset is around this portable and build out. It seems like the board was not informed of issues and problems. They were solved, either the chair was making unilateral decisions or they were just dealt with by the administrator, but they were not brought forward to a board where any, you know, where the financial decisions should have been made.
And so, as you said earlier, well earlier in the meeting, that you were excluded at that time. But
was
you still
excluded.
you still had access to the minutes, and
I
that
did.
included in-camera minutes.
That did, yes. And I read them thoroughly because I wanted to be informed about what was, I was afraid exactly of that happening. That's one of the reasons I was suspended, for asking tough questions. I'm really upset by this, I have to tell you.
Okay. I ask those questions just because I'm trying to deal with some requests for information, and so I appreciate you adding what you know to this. Okay, we have one last. I think is that the end? No, Gary, you had one more agenda item, right?
Yeah, the UBID conversion process. Just a really quick status update on a couple of late breaking things since I last reported out at the last meeting. April 8th, I'm going to come up there because a vast majority of the records have been taken from the admin office and the water treatment plant and Dan's office. They're now in secure storage up at the aquatic center. And the plan is on April the 8th for CVRD and ourselves, and I'll be up there to kind of oversee or at least assist CVRD in doing a preliminary sort in terms of what documents are clearly eligible for destruction and which documents should be retained for future digitization. So that's on for April 8th. The CVRD has pretty much decided, I think, that the lease for the UBID office building should expire at the end of June and the office close. And basically, you know, Lindsay, Janice, if they elect to take employment with the CVRD, would essentially be operating out of the CVRD office. So our admin office building essentially the lease would be discontinued. In terms of the conversion process, the CVRD is proposing to do a open house. However, with COVID restrictions right now, it's probably going to be a virtual open house for the public to have a Q&A, a little presentation on the conversion process and what's entailed and where it's at and where it's going. They're talking about May 17th, 18th, or 19th as the preferred dates. They've thrown those out there. I believe that's a Monday, Tuesday, or a Wednesday. My calendar has disappeared on me, but they would like to know is there a preferred date. I asked them to stay away from Thursday because of board meeting days. So they'd like to know the 17th, 18th, or 19th. They're talking about a time of 4:30 to 5:30 to 6, something like that, at the end of the working day. Does the board have a preference for a date, a Monday, a Tuesday, or a Wednesday, the 17th, 18th, or 19th?
I have a preference for the 18th
18th?
Of what? Of where?
May.
of May.
May.
It in all likelihood will be a virtual open house. Not
Yep, the 18th
preferred, but 18th?
sounds good to me.
Okay, April 12th, CVRD water staff are going to be doing with Dan a comprehensive tour of the water supply and distribution system. They're starting now to get oriented, orienting their senior personnel, senior operator orientation and familiarization. So just FYI, April 12th is the day they're throwing around. They want to do a comprehensive tour of the Langley Lake, the supply system, the water treatment plant, the distribution system, the whole 9 yards. So again, this is all part and parcel of the conversion activities. That's the update on conversion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for Gary?
When is the next, there isn't one in April, is there, Gary or Ian, of the conversion committee?
I believe there is.
Yes.
I'm so worried that I'm gonna screw that up again.
Yes, yes, yes. And again, my calendar has disappeared on me, but yes, there is a meeting.
In April?
In April.
Oh dear,
And,
okay.
I don't want to throw a date out, but I do know the time is 3 o'clock, I believe.
I'm gonna run and look for my calendar. I don't want to miss that.
Just give me a minute and I'll confirm that.
It is the 20th. I have it at 2 o'clock, Gary.
Okay, I stand to
What
be
was-
corrected.
What was that date again?
I have it April 20th at 2 o'clock.
Oh, there it is.
Okay. Thank you.
Love to see if Gary has got it at the same time.
Yeah, let me see.
April, yeah, hold on. Yes, April 20th, Tuesday, 2 to 3 p.m.
March. That's right. I've got that written down too. Okay. And the board meeting is, our board meeting is on the 15th and the AGM is on the 29th.
Correct.
And the
there's
next-
There's a special board meeting on the 22nd to review the audited financial statements in advance of.
Okay.
Oh,
So we
we've
do
got-
have a Cal meeting on the 22nd at 2:30.
It would be a special board meeting on
special
the,
board
there'll
meeting.
be the regular board meeting on the 15th.
15th,
Okay.
A
then the special one.
special board meeting on the 22nd at 2:30.
Okay,
Only item will be the presentation of the financial statements and review by the board.
yeah,
And the AGM is set for 7 p.m. The 29th.
yeah.
Because of COVID restrictions, it has to be unfortunately virtual at this point in time anyway. And I don't think they're going to be loosening up. And just FYI, the procedure bylaw requires 28 days advance notice. We've met that. It's been up on the website for the last couple of days. The ads are going in the paper the 7th and the 14th, 2 consecutive ads. So, and the notices, I think we're going out in the community today for the AGM, again, 7 o'clock on the 29th of April. Ordinarily, what happens, as you know, you have to have an inaugural meeting following the AGM within 30 days of the AGM. So I would be proposing that rather than having a cow meeting the first Thursday in May after the AGM, you have the inaugural meeting on that particular day, 1 week following the AGM. That probably, in my mind, makes most sense.
So like the
Okay.
13th.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
That's 2 weeks after the first
Yeah.
Thursday.
Well, if the AGM is on the 29th, then ordinarily you'd be having a cow meeting the first, yes, you'd be having a cow meeting
May 6th.
May 6th, correct? So
Yeah.
that's what I would be suggesting you think about, is having your inaugural meeting, which has to take place 30 days, within 30 days after the AGM. Just make that meeting on the 6th, which ordinarily would
Yeah.
be cow, make it your inaugural meeting.
At
Yeah.
2:30?
Yes.
And then the board meeting on the 20th of May.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And then we have a cow June 3rd and a board meeting. Our final board meeting would be June 17th, all
Yeah.
as we currently understand it.
So if
Yeah.
that's okay, then I'll update the, as you know, on the website, in terms of the calendar of meetings, we can update that. It's
Yeah.
already up, it's updated for the AGM on the 29th, but I'll update it for the inaugural meeting.
Gary, would it make sense to take that last June board meeting and make it as late as possible, like June 25th? Or do you need it to be maybe be earlier for final decisions? What do you think?
I'd leave it at this point in time the way it is, because something's telling me that if I'm a betting person, we may have to schedule the odd special board meeting, maybe even in May or in June, as we approach that deadline. And of course, you know, there's advance notice requirements, but I'd kind of just stick with that first and third Monday or Thursday at this point in time. I'd stick with the 17th, but I suspect there may be a requirement for another board meeting between the 17th of June and the 1st of July.
Okay.
I think the last thing to talk about with the AGM is just Trustee Harold's and Ted's term. Because we moved our AGM, it is no longer in sync with the order in council to dissolve Union Bay Estates. And a part of that order in council is to reduce our required number of trustees from 5 to 3. So that happens on April 22nd, which means that we need to have one trustee drop off on April 22nd. Trustee Haroldson has agreed that he will relinquish his term as of that day, as of April 22nd. He will attend the AGM and will be able to comment and participate in the meeting, but he will not be able to vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I understand. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Can I just throw out to those of us who are on the conversion meeting that the next one with the CVRD after April is Friday, May 7th at 1 p.m.
Looking, you said Friday, what?
May 7th at 1 p.m.
Yes, correct.
Yes? Okay, great. Thank you.
That's what I have in my calendar.
So do
Yeah,
I.
and then it's June 22nd at 3 p.m. I just don't want to mess up on the times
Correct,
again.
correct. June
Okay.
22nd, June 22nd at 3 p.m.
Okay,
Okay,
all done.
thank you.
Okay, I think that is all of the agenda. So I guess motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor of adjournment? say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for contributions.
Yeah.
And a good discussion today. We got into some stuff and disagreed and got on with it anyway, so that's great.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a
Take
good
care.
Easter
Bye-bye.
weekend.
You
Hope
too.
the bunny,
Everyone too.
bunny
Bye-bye.
comes to visit you. Okay.